Number 1.
A cold case involving the unsolved murder of a 5-year-old girl in 1993 was finally closed today, but the suspect will not be arrested. "It's been a long 18 years," said Richard Berrelez, grandfather of Alie Berrelez, who was killed in Englewood, Colorado, 1993. "But Alie's not a victim. I don't want people to think of her as a victim. She's a hero, and she's been a hero for the past 18 years." Englewood police said today what they had long suspected. The DNA of neighbor Nick Stouffer, 41, was found on the girl's underwear when they recovered her body. Stouffer, however, will not face charges. He died of natural causes in 2001, never having stood trial for the crime. Alie Berrelez was kidnapped from her apartment complex, where she was sitting eating pizza with other children in the parking lot in Englewood on May 18, 1993. Following a massive search by police and fire workers and volunteers, and the use of scent tracking dogs, the little girl was found 4 days later in a canvas bag near a creek 14 miles away from her home. Cold case killing of little girl solved 18 years later. Stouffer had been the primary suspect in the crime since it occurred, but police did not mount a case against him because of a lack of evidence, according to Englewood Police Chief John Collins. Police said that the only evidence they had against Stouffer was circumstantial, including the testimony of Berrelez's 3-year-old brother who may have witnessed the kidnapping. According to ABC News affiliate ABC7, Alie's young brother told police the old man took Alie. The boy then walked to the door of apartment where Stouffer had lived. He had just moved out and indicated it was the apartment of the old man. Detectives traveled to Redlands, Calif. to take blood samples and hair samples from Stouffer. However, DNA testing did not exist at that time. An autopsy revealed no obvious cause of death and showed no indication of sexual assault or significant trauma, according to ABC7. The scent tracking dogs that helped lead police to Berrelez's body then followed the scent back to the apartment complex where she lived, which police said pointed to a neighbor being the culprit, according to the report. "We wanted to put the cuffs on Stouffer so bad, but we couldn't because the evidence was not there," Collins said today. "So over time, the pain, the anguish of not being able to do that kept the fire alive, and it was terribly frustrating. That's why we're here today. It may be therapy for us to be able to say it's over. All of the work the police and the family and everyone put into it finally came to a conclusion," Collins said. Collins said that advancements in DNA technology had finally allowed authorities to confirm the match. "Over time, DNA analysis has advanced," said Katie Featherston, forensic scientist at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. "In 1993 it was not available at the CBI lab, but over time we have been able to deal with samples that are smaller and smaller and/or less pristine. Those advances allowed us to do the DNA analysis on this case." Collins could not speculate on a motive for the crime, saying only that Stouffer was known to have a problem with alcohol and drugs. He had a criminal record including alcohol and minor drug charges, but no history of sex offenses, Collins said. Richard Berrelez said he wished Stouffer was alive so he could confront him and ask him those questions, as well as see him stand trial. "There are a lot of questions that we have as a family that we will never have the answer to," Richard Berrelez said. "All we can do is guess at why and how and what time everything happened during the different days."
Number 2.
In August of 1980, Joyce McLain went for a jog and never came back. 16-year-old Joyce McLain was a pretty exceptional girl. She was the kind of teen who excelled at anything she put her mind to, and she was involved in just about everything, though I cannot fathom how she fit it all in. Joyce loved to play her saxophone. She played in the school band and would improvise solos and write her own music. Her musical talent went beyond her saxophone though, and according to her mother, she could play just about any instrument she picked up by ear. She was about to be a junior at Schenck High School in her tiny hometown of East Millinocket, Maine. After a day of hanging out with her friends swimming on the lake, Joyce decided to squeeze in one last activity: a run. It wasn't her favorite, but she'd been trying to a little more exercise to make sure she was ready for the upcoming soccer season. She set out around 7:30 p.m. as the cooler night air was starting to settle in. But Joyce never made it home. After 2 days of trying to find Joyce, their search came to a devastating end. Joyce's body was found bludgeoned to death in a power line clearing behind Schenck High School, just 200 feet from the soccer field where she was set to play fullback that coming season. Who would do this to such a well-loved young woman with such a bright future? Her mother, Pam McLain, told the Bangor Daily News, "It's hard for me to believe that anyone I know could have done it, but someone did do it. It did happen. We have to accept it, but there will be no peace or rest until whoever did it is caught, nor is there going to be rest for anyone in this community. So please, as a mother, I'm begging, please come forward." Another strange incident. There was another incident the night of Joyce's murder. A teenager in town, Philip Scott Fournier, who went by Scott, was in an accident that practically killed him. In fact, during the initial phase of the investigation, he was in a coma from a traumatic brain injury. Scott had broken into a local garage and stole their fuel truck, drove it straight through the garage door, and ended up colliding with a car a few miles away, completely flipping the truck. It took about 3 weeks for him to regain consciousness, and around that time police paid him a visit to see if he knew anything, but he was little help and couldn't remember anything about that night. A bit later in 1981, Scott's memory started to come back into focus, and he recalled some disturbing memories from the night of Joyce's murder. He still couldn't remember much from the night, but what was resurfacing was disturbing. Was it just a dream, or was it real? This is a story of hope. Over the years, Joyce's cold case was featured on the original Unsolved Mysteries in 1989, hosted by Robert Stack, which garnered national attention for East Millinocket, Maine. Despite this, Joyce McLain's murder is one of the longest homicide investigations in Maine State Police history, spanning 38 years. But this case is solved, and it gives hope to other families of cold case victims that one day their turn will come, no matter how many years pass by.
Number 3.
In September 1, 1969. That evening, not one, not two, but at least 5 different people went through the whole experience of sighting the UFO and being entrapped in its blinding light for a little while. Curious to know all the locations? Here's all that we know. The 1969 UFO event is not particularly well known outside of Berkshire County because the people who experienced it were too scared to come out and say anything due to the fear of being ridiculed. However, in 2015, it was brought back into the public consciousness when the Great Barrington Historical Society decided to include Thomas Reed's account of his family's encounter with it in its historical archives. So, let's start there, shall we? 9-year-old Thomas Reed was riding in a car with his brother, mother, and grandmother, crossing the Sheffield Bridge to head home from their restaurant Village on the Green on September 1, 1969. All seemed to be well and normal for the entire family, but as soon as they crossed the covered bridge and came into the open again, they saw the blinding bright light from right beside them. Tom remembers that everything was dead quiet in the area, which was extremely strange considering the openness and greenery that was around them. Not even a cricket could have been heard. His mother stopped the car after the whole family saw what appeared to be a glow on both sides of the dirt road, and soon that light had filled up the inside of their car. And then, just as suddenly as the light had come, it had vanished. They were all in their car, but his mother and grandmother had suddenly switched spots. After a while, however, they realized that almost 3 hours had gone by. The Reed family wasn't the only one who saw and experienced something that night. The local radio station, WSBS, broadcasted various accounts of the event. There were 3 different sightings in Great Barrington. All 3 of them were just miles from each other, but they were just as chilling. Jane Green was on her way back from Stockbridge when she saw the UFO on the highway. She recalled the experience to be quite similar to that of Tom Reed's, except hers only accounted for a few seconds. It was dead silent and there was a blinding aura, but then quite quickly, the UFO lifted up and went over the hills, never to be seen by her again. She said her kids too saw it overhead their house as well, but they never mentioned it to her in fear of scaring her off or being told that they were making it up. Another person who experienced this paranormal activity firsthand in Great Barrington is Tom Warner. His experience, though, was different. He felt a telepathic wave that told him to go home from his neighbor's house, and when he did, he was caught by the UFO's light outside. He has stated that he had no control over his body and that whatever he felt like he was doing wasn't exactly happening. The neighbor with whom he had been, Jane Shaw, also admitted to seeing the whole thing. Tom had vanished into the light and then minutes later, he was sprawled on the floor as if the aliens were done with him and had gotten what they had wanted. A couple of miles away from Great Barrington, near Lake Mansfield, Melanie Kirchdorfer and her family sighted the UFO. They were in their car having ice cream when her father saw the light and decided to chase it. She said that she had the same experience as the others, but when she came to, she was alone at the lake and had to walk home. Even Tom Warner remembers seeing Melanie inside the UFO while he was there. He remembered her eyes. These people had never met each other, they had no idea about one another's existence, but suddenly they were all reporting the exact same thing. Because it was termed as baloney by officials, it was never properly documented at that time. But the people who saw it knew what had happened, and when they met each other and felt some sort of a connection within them, they knew that it was all real. Reports from other places like North Cannon, Egremont, Lenox, Pittsfield, and Stockbridge also came in and pointed towards a UFO sighting, but alas, as no investigations were done, no answers were provided. Over the years, Berkshire County has reported several other cases of UFO sightings, but there aren't even speculations from where this truly unidentified object originates from that could give the people some answers or peace.
Number 4.
On July 9, 1989, 3-month-old Ryan Stallings was taken by his mother, Patricia, to Cardinal Glennon Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, after he became violently ill. Since birth, he had suffered from chronic gastric distress. On the day he was brought to the emergency room, his breathing became extremely labored and he was vomiting uncontrollably. He was placed in the pediatric intensive care unit. Patricia and her husband, David, rented a room at the hospital to be close to Ryan. After 3 days, they were told that he would recover. However, they were also told that he had been poisoned. Lab tests showed that he had ethyl glycol and acetone in his body. Ethyl glycol is normally found in antifreeze, and acetone is normally found in fingernail polish. David and Patricia confirmed that both substances were in their home. The doctors were suspicious of them. Detectives were brought in to question David and Patricia separately. They believed that one of them had poisoned Ryan, however, no charges were filed. His condition steadily improved and 12 days later, he was released from the hospital. However, he was not allowed to return to David and Patricia. Instead, he was taken by social workers and placed in foster care. David and Patricia were only allowed to see Ryan 1 hour a week during a supervised visit. For 5 weeks, the visits continued without incident. On the 6th week, Patricia was left alone with Ryan for a short period of time. 3 days later, he suffered another severe vomiting episode. Once again, he was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with ethyl glycol poisoning. Patricia was arrested and charged with assault on Ryan. At the same time, his condition worsened and he was placed on life support. David tried to get Patricia released so she could see Ryan, but the judge refused. On September 7, 1989, he was taken off life support. He passed away at 6:30 a.m. He was not yet 6 months old. Patricia's charges were upgraded to first-degree murder. She was not allowed to attend Ryan's funeral. A few weeks later, Patricia discovered that she was pregnant again. However, she remained in prison. On February 27, 1990, David D.J. Stallings Jr. was born at a Madison County hospital. Despite the fact that David was not a suspect, he was not allowed to take DJ home, and he became a ward of the state. When DJ was 2 weeks old, he began showing symptoms almost identical to the ones Ryan had. The St. Louis Children's Hospital diagnosed his illness as a rare genetic disorder called methylmalonic acidemia, or MMA. This causes the body to produce chemical byproducts that are similar to ethyl glycol found in antifreeze. According to a medical geneticist, it is easy for doctors to confuse MMA for ethyl glycol poisoning due to the similar symptoms. Because of its rarity, some doctors may not even realize that they are looking at MMA and confuse it for ethyl glycol. Due to the new medical evidence, prosecutors began re-evaluating this case and Patricia was released from jail. However, she was not allowed to have visitation rights with DJ. Prosecutors decided to continue with this case. They were certain that Ryan had not died of MMA, but was instead poisoning. In the judge's chambers, prosecutors presented 4 expert witnesses who claimed that he was poisoned. The defense, however, presented no expert witnesses, so the judge ruled that DJ's MMA diagnosis was inadmissible in court. Without the medical testimony, this case seemed virtually airtight. The prosecution focused on David and Patricia's 6th supervised visit with Ryan. However, according to David, Patricia was left alone with Ryan for less than a minute as he took his parents out of the room. Prosecutors believed that she had fed him ethyl glycol through a bottle. They claimed that traces of that were found in it. However, David claimed that he had given it to her, and there was no apparent evidence of tampering. The defense pointed out that it took over 3 days for Ryan to have symptoms of ethyl glycol poisoning. The medical geneticist stated that it would be nearly impossible for him to have been poisoned during the 6th visit. The prosecutor, however, claimed that the foster parents may have not noticed the symptoms until later. On March 4, 1991, Patricia was convicted of Ryan's murder and sentenced to life in prison. She has only seen DJ 3 times since his birth. David is only allowed to see him once a week. To this day, Patricia maintains her innocence. After the broadcast, several physicians familiar with MMA called the telecenter in hopes of helping Patricia in her appeal. Her attorneys petitioned the court for a new trial, and on July 30, 1991, she was granted a new trial and released from prison. On September 20, 1991, a press conference was held in St. Louis. Dr. Piero Rinaldo, a geneticist from Yale University, stated that independent serum tests confirmed that Ryan had definitely died of MMA. The prosecutor then dropped all of the charges against Patricia. During the press conference, she and David were told that custody of DJ would be returned to them. In October 1991, he finally came home to them. David and Patricia later sued the hospital and labs that incorrectly diagnosed Ryan with ethyl glycol poisoning. In 1993, they settled a lawsuit in which they were awarded several $1 million. They later divorced. Tragically, DJ passed away on September 17, 2013 at the age of 23. Sadly, David passed away on April 30, 2019 at the age of 57.
Number 5.
Hello, my loyal true crime readers. I am thrilled to let you know that there has been what appears to be a huge break in this case. The disappearance of Lauria Bible and Alie Freeman is one of the first cases I covered, and I have been following it closely for years. For background details about the case, I suggest that you read my initial post below and then return here to learn about the update. On April 23, 2018, the police named 3 men in connection with the abduction and murder of Alie and Lauria: Warren Phil Welch, David Pennington, and Ronnie Busick. Both Welch and Pennington are deceased, but Busick was arrested in Wichita. The 66-year-old was returned to Craig County to face 4 murder counts. He is accused of murdering Kathy and Danny Freeman, Ashley's parents, and then abducting and murdering Alie and Lauria. At the time of this update, Busick denies any involvement in the crimes. He remains incarcerated with his case stalled as both the defense and prosecution have mental capacity tests performed. The arrest affidavit released by the Craig County prosecutors provides an overview of what allegedly happened to Alie and Lauria. On the night of the young women's disappearance, Welch, Pennington, and Busick visited the Freeman home to settle a bad drug deal. Witnesses have told investigators that after murdering Ashley's parents, the 3 suspects took the girls and had fun with them. Another witness told the authorities that Alie and Lauria were held for days at Welch's trailer and were raped and violently strangled to die. The police believe that their bodies were then thrown in a pit. As in many cold cases that eventually get solved, a former partner of one of the suspects is playing a key role by providing much-needed information. An ex-girlfriend of Welch's told police that he had decorated his trailer with Alie and Lauria's missing persons poster. Even more, his ex said that Welch had Polaroids that showed Alie and Lauria bound and gagged on his bed. Apparently at least a dozen witnesses have reported that the three men kept numerous photographs as trophies to brag about their crime and to threaten witnesses into keeping silent. One other key discovery led to the recent progress in the case. In February 2017, documents came to light that led the current investigators to two private detectives that initially looked into the abduction and murders. Tom Pryor, one of the private detectives, no longer had his files on the case. However, he did still have in his possession an insurance card found at the scene on the day after the Freemans were killed. This card reportedly belongs to a woman who was living with Welch at the time. Given that Welch often drove her vehicle, this is believed to place him at the scene of the crime. In a statement on their Facebook page, Lauria's family explains that although it might seem like Busick's arrest is a big break in the case, most of the details have been known for years. It just took plenty of time, effort, and patience to finally gather enough information to move forward with charges. Although I am ecstatic about the progress, I am only cautiously optimistic. Sure, Welch's girlfriend's insurance card may have been found at the scene of the crime. Can it be proven that he was the one who dropped it? And during the crime and not on a previous visit? And to what extent can this information be used to prosecute Busick? Also, although many witnesses claim to have seen Welch, Pennington, and Busick with the Polaroids of Alie and Lauria, the photographs have never been found by investigators. Will witness statements about these photographs be enough in court? Can a guilty verdict be reached, especially without Alie and Lauria's bodies to provide forensic evidence? Searches are ongoing for the young women's bodies. As recently as July 2019, investigators combed through several sites in Pitcher, Oklahoma. Some of the sites examined include the area surrounding the mobile home Welch once rented, as well as several ponds and treat areas. No signs of Alie and Lauria were found. Even if the persons responsible for the disappearance and murder of Alie and Lauria have been identified and Busick is found guilty, this case is far from closed until Alie and Lauria are found and returned to their loved ones. A $50,000 reward remains in place for information leading to the location of Alie and Lauria. Let's keep spreading the word about this case.
Number 6.
In 1986, a longtime resident of Thermopolis, Wyoming, whom we will call Gabby, moved away. He left some of his belongings in a shed, including an old, locked trunk. He left the shed with a friend, Newell Sessions. Then, 6 years passed. Finally, Newell couldn't stand the suspense another minute and opened the trunk. What he found shocked him. We had uncovered a human skeleton. And there wasn't too much said at that time. I think it was my wife who asked me to dig a hole and give it a proper burial. Newell's wife told him he had to call the sheriff. Before he did, though, Newell felt obliged to contact Gabby. Gabby told Newell that he'd never even opened the footlocker. He thought he'd bought it at a garage sale. But according to Newell, when it came to the time and the place, Gabby's memory failed him. He acted probably as surprised as I did when I opened the trunk that he couldn't believe it. He thought I was kidding him. And I told him, no, I'm not kidding you. There is a human skeleton in there. Newell Sessions contacted John Lumley, the sheriff of Hot Spring County. Right from the start, Sheriff Lumley was suspicious. I've talked to a lot of people about this case and everybody said, almost 99.99% or more, that they would have opened it immediately upon purchasing it. They said if they went to a yard sale or garage sale, bought a trunk, that's half the excitement, it's like a Christmas present, can't wait to get home to open it. 2 days later, the skull was examined by an X-ray machine. The tests revealed that a bullet was lodged in the skull. Now Sheriff Lumley thought he might have a murder case on his hands. He decided to have a chat with Gabby. But Gabby was unsure about the details. He said he might have bought the trunk in Wyoming, Iowa, Illinois, or maybe Oklahoma. It might have been as early as 1973, but maybe not. According to Gabby, he just wasn't sure. Well, my being a suspect, what do I have to worry about? I mean really, I know I didn't do the guy. I didn't shoot this dude, I'm not even as old as the gun that shot him." But Sheriff Lumley's primary concern was not Gabby's age. Gabby is in his mid-40s. The footlocker and the lock were made back in the 30s time period. "I don't believe that Gabby was the person that caused the death of this person, but my thoughts have always been that he has knowledge of who the person in the trunk is or where they came from." On March 31, 1992, Sheriff Lumley turned the skeleton over to the Wyoming State Crime Lab in Cheyenne in hopes that maybe the bones could tell him what Gabby could not. Sandra Mays was the lab technician that examined the skeleton. He was in his 50s to 60s. Probably stood about 5'8", plus or minus an inch and a half, was a Caucasian male. The bullet was from a .25 caliber weapon that was produced in 1904 and then available in the United States about 1908. In an effort to identify the victim, Sandra Mays created a three-dimensional facial reconstruction out of clay. Only the eyes and hair are guesswork. Otherwise, Sandra's facial recreation should be a good likeness of the man who somehow got a bullet in his head sometime after 1908. But who was the man? How and why did he die? The old trunk appeared to have been used by someone in the U.S. Armed Services between World War I and World War II. Perhaps the trunk, alone, holds the key to unraveling this bizarre mystery. After 25 years, the work of the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office has brought this case to a close. In October 2017, a DNA sample was submitted by a woman who said that her father had been shot in the head sometime in 1960 by her uncle, and her father's remains were placed in a trunk. The uncle transported the trunk to Wyoming and then left it behind. The DNA sample was a 99% match to the bones, which have now been identified as Joseph Mulvaney.